Please give a warm Liberty Dinner welcome to Lorella Praeli. Woo!
Gonna do some adjusting here. How are we doing tonight? You know, I feel like when I'm in Oregon, it just has to be louder. So how are we doing tonight? There we go. So can we, for 1 second, express some gratitude, show some gratitude and some love to the Oregon Convention Center wait staff for treating us with love tonight? Along the side of the road in the hills of northwestern Connecticut walks Lady Liberty, 5 feet, 2 inches tall, wheat-colored skin, carrying a backpack with an umbrella and a complete English dictionary. She makes the road by walking. Chela first learned of the promise of America in the linoleum corridors of Guillermo Almenara Hospital in Peru, where my right leg was amputated after a car pinned me against a wall on January 17th, 1991. I was 2.5 and learned to walk with 2 crutches, a mechanical prosthesis, and a song my mother taught me. Yo tengo una piernita que se pone y se saca, se pone y se saca. I have a leg that you put on and take off, put on and take off. Chela's anthem assured I was cooler than those around me. After all, I could take my leg off. When I think about our American story, I believe it was born in my mother's heart that night as she stood over my hospital bed. Chela was determined that I would reach my full potential, and eventually, the only place that could contain such a vision was here in America. No tenemos papeles, my mother told me. We don't have papers. Suddenly, her paralyzing fear when a police car pulled up behind us made sense, as did the times she begged my aunt to co-sponsor our apartment lease, add us to her AT&T account, and insure our car. In retrospect, I think I knew we were undocumented long before the afternoon I pushed for my 9-digit social security number to fill out my FAFSA form. Fear of being discovered, found out, ousted, forced me into the shadows. I didn't know then how embracing my identity as an undocumented American would transform my life. For years, I learned to be quiet and to live in the shadows and hide. I could no longer just wait and sit for something to happen. My name is Lorella Praeli. I am undocumented and unafraid, I said in 2010. My agony and shame began to wear off. I could taste freedom, emancipation. My immigrant experience has been defined by moments of courage and sacrifice, hope and desolation, promise and transgression. It has been shaped by a desire to be counted and expose contradictions. As philosopher Jacques Rancière writes, politics exists because those who have no right to be counted as speaking beings make themselves of some account. The limitations our legal status conferred upon us force us to realize America's imperfections, and in turn, we set out the work to fulfill her promise. That is what you have been doing right here in Oregon. Not settling for the status quo, making freedom possible, rejecting hate, speaking truth to power, making space for those closest to the problem to pave the path forward, safeguarding liberty, making yourselves of some account. When an anti-immigrant group with deep ties to white nationalist network gathered enough signatures to ask voters to repeal a law that keeps state and local law enforcement from becoming force multipliers in Trump's deportations force, you said, oh, hell no. Not on our watch, not in Oregon. It wasn't easy, but you were fierce and fearless, resolute in your commitment to defeat Measure 105, and you did, 63-37. I remember my last visit to Oregon almost 1 year ago. Upon arrival, I felt overwhelmed. The stakes were high. I thought if we lose this in Oregon, it won't just change the state. It will set the tone for the country. But after meeting with ACLU of Oregon staff and many of its partners, having dinner with Andrea, Raina, Nancy, Kopana, Louis, Casey, I thought, oh, they've got this. I mean, really, y'all had done the hard work of building trust. You knew the work wasn't done, the threats would reemerge, and that if justice were to prevail, you needed each other. That the whole was more than the sum of its parts. That's why after a loss in 2014, you built One Oregon, a dynamic immigrants' rights coalition. And wow. Let me just say that I travel all over the country, and I can state with confidence that what you've built here in Oregon is truly special. I haven't seen it anywhere else. I also want to give a special shout out to David and Jan and the rest of the ACLU Oregon staff. These are transformative times, aren't they? You've taken on the fight and you've raised the standard of performance for yourselves. You know that it's not enough to win, but that we must win in a way that makes us stronger, which is why the ACLU of Oregon launched a field program and organized a massive volunteer effort to defeat Measure 105 and Measure 106. With over 600 volunteer shifts completed, ACLU volunteers knocked on more than 20,000 voter doors and made more than 50,000 voter calls in the state. They contacted more than 300,000 voters through mail and ran a series of digital ads targeting persuadable and Spanish-speaking voters. Now that, my friends, is how you fight and how you win, all while building political power and setting up for the next fight, which I hear involves legislation to expand to issue inequity in the state and to make the criminal justice system more fair. I know that the people in this room and those who heard you at the doors and on the phones are ready to continue to pave the path forward. I am so proud of the work that is happening here in Oregon, but I also want to give a little bit of the national context. This past election cycle, the ACLU took on many fights and engaged in the electoral fights in ways we hadn't done it before. And I believe deeply that our efforts led to transformative change around the country. We partnered with people in the great state of Florida, and we gave the promise of a second chance to 1.4 million individuals with felony convictions in Florida who will now have the right to vote. We engaged in down-ballot races all around the country, including in sheriff's races, and one in particular in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, where the Democratic incumbent ran being proud of a 287G program which deputizes local law enforcement to act as federal immigration agents. And I can happily say today that that person is no longer in office and that the 287G program has been ended. That is what happens when you put civil rights and civil liberties on the ballot and you make sure to tell voters to vote like their rights depend on it, right? You know that we don't endorse as the ACLU, but that we can show up and do the work of educating voters and making sure that candidates actually show up and fight for us, to ask us for our vote and our support. And in doing so, that they take our civil rights and civil liberties fights to another level, and that's what happened in North Carolina. We fought to ensure that every ballot was counted in Georgia. We also took Donald Trump's border wall fight to heart in Congress. And we just wrapped up an appropriation sessions where Donald Trump came in and asked for $5 billion to build his border wall and only walked out with $1.3 billion, which is still too much. And the ACLU is now taking him to court over his fake national emergency declaration at the border. And so the fight ahead is hopeful. And I just want to share a little bit more about some of the things that we're doing. We're going to continue in these appropriations fight because if there's one way to limit Donald Trump's ability to go out and deport more people is really through the appropriations process. We're engaging in the electoral fight in 2019. We're about to launch our 2020 program in one of the early states. And so the fights continue across state legislatures, including here in Oregon. I also want to talk about some other stuff because it's important to celebrate our wins, but I also feel like we are being tested every single day, and we've had our fair share of some really tough days. Last year, I found myself spending a lot of time in Brownsville, Texas. One day, as we took our seats, the courtroom filled with men and women dressed in jeans and mud-stained shirts, the jangling of their shackles was jarring. Distressed and exhausted, they began to say, culpable, culpable. A mother who could barely whisper, interrupted the haunting and near unanimous succession of guilty pleas. With tears running down the side of her face, she looked at Judge Morgan and asked, ¿Cuándo puedo hablar con mi hijo, señor? Solo pido que me devuelvan a mi hijo. When can I talk to my son, sir? I just want my son back. 2 months after then Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the zero-tolerance policy directing federal prosecutors to criminally prosecute all adult migrants entering the United States between ports of entry, including those traveling with their children, my colleagues and I headed down to Brownsville, Texas, to meet with the local coalition and advocates and figure out how to force the Trump administration to end their cruel and illegal practice. We had spent the last few weeks organizing distributed actions around the country and assisting members of Congress with trips to the southwest border, leading to an unstoppable uproar across the country. However, even after the ensuing public outcry resulted in Trump signing an executive order bringing his family separation policy to a halt, there was no plan in place to reunify the more than 2,000 families his administration had forcibly separated until Judge Sabra ordered their reunification on July 28, 2018, after the ACLU brought the case to the court. We will look back at our government's decision to kidnap children from their parents with incredulity and remember that we, the people, reined in the autocratic impulses of our commander-in-chief by taking to the streets and rushing to the courts. Today, we have reunited over 2,500 immigrant children separated from their parents and forced the Trump administration to reverse course on a hateful policy. You know, I sometimes think of my young activist self. I remember youthful, beautiful defiance. The belief that we are all always marching towards justice. I remember how clearly we, the dreamers, knew that full membership and participation could not be won if we were mere props. That it was not enough to tell our story, the stories others had scripted for us. That we needed to own our power and become the narrators of our truth. And that we must always, always speak truth to power. In fact, as we enter the presidential cycle, we may find ourselves challenging those running for the highest office to take bold, audacious positions. We must, and we must do so without fear. Back in 2011, when we were fighting to win protections for young undocumented people, key to our strategy was exposing President Obama's deportation policies. The White House tried to talk their way out of the facts by claiming they were not targeting dreamers. But we had the stories to prove it and the strategy to organize key constituencies to pressure him to take action. And as we became the authors of our destiny, we forced others to make room for us at the table and prevented them from making decisions about us without us. A contested presidential election led to heated debates and exasperation with our strategy. Many of our allies reprimanded us for targeting President Obama in an election year and relayed that if he lost, we would be to blame. In a meeting with over 30 advocates in Washington, D.C., one of them looked me in the eye and told me that we were, quote, being selfish and throwing our parents under the bus, end quote. The audacity, I thought. Nevertheless, we were clear-eyed. This was not about them, Republicans or Democrats. It was about our lives. On June 15, 2012, President Obama announced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA, policy. They are Americans in their hearts, in their minds, in every single way but one, on paper, he declared. With it, the lives of 800,000 people, my sisters included, were transformed. The movement changed my life. It taught me, in the words of Frederick Douglass, that power concedes nothing without a demand. And if there is no struggle, there is no progress. 6 years since the Rose Garden announcement, the current president has announced the rescission of DACA, banned people from some Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States, and threatened, albeit erroneously, to end citizenship at birth by executive order. Nothing about today's fight to defend and advance civil rights and civil liberties is easy. But it is on the hardest of days that I reflect on Lady Liberty. Chella, my mother, and the millions like her who sacrificed their dream and made ours their own, who pounded the pavement from sunrise to sunset with English dictionaries in their backpacks on their way to clean homes when they didn't have a car, and who taught us to rise above cynicism and reject pessimism and to never, ever give up hope, because we came here to fulfill America's promise. Thank you. Okay, so since we're all standing, I feel like this is a good moment. Stay standing if you can. At my heart, I end up doing a lot of policy work today, and at my heart and in my training, I'm an organizer. And I believe that nothing happens if we don't organize together. And this, to me, feels like a beautiful moment and opportunity to show everyone in Oregon and around the country the power that exists within this room. So I'm gonna ask you to join me in doing the farm worker clap. Who's done it here? Raise your hand. All right, we've got some people in the room who have done it. So we're gonna do it together. We're gonna get really loud. We're gonna hope that people in Alabama hear us, that people in Georgia hear us. So if you would join with me, let's do this right. Ready? We're gonna do that again because it's getting better. You're better than when I got up on stage. But Oregon is at the top of my list of states, and I really do travel a fair amount around the country. I'm heading to Alabama tomorrow. But there's something really special about the state and the coalition and the partnerships and the people that exist here in Oregon. So let's do this one more time because we've got a lot of fights to take on in your own state legislature. Ready? Thank you, Oregon. Woo. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. All right, let's do it. Let's be bilingual. We should be bilingual today. Yes, we can. All right. All right, we'll do both. We'll do both. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Sí se puede, sí se puede, sí se puede, sí se puede, sí se All right. Turning it back over to you, my friend.